So question, is Capture my go-to previs software? Yes, and the reason for that is because when I first started out doing previs work, it was the cheapest one available with, I think, the most feature packed for the money. Over the years, for each project that I've done that has needed it, I've increased my license a little bit. I've made it so now I have the fully unlocked version. Obviously, like an initial upfront cost, it's a lot if you're going to go for the full version. But by being able to kind of piece that out show by show over time, I was able to get that. And now I pay every year, for the upgrade, but that's only about $100 or so a year. Question earlier, how relevant is MA in the theater realm next to ETC? Not super relevant. There are some theaters that are using MA stuff, but even, 10 years ago when you had the dual console situation on Broadway where there are a lot of MAs running moving lights and EOS is running conventionals, EOS is running it all now. I'm sure somebody here smarter than me or is more connected there can tell me. I don't think there's very many shows running on Broadway right now without an EOS console. Actually, I know Harrison did something for, Harrison, if you're still here, if you want to chime in on that, Harrison did some kind of study when he was an intern for ETC and to figure out what, how many shows on Broadway were using EOS consoles. So I find the same thing in most regional theaters that I'm working in. I haven't, and it's honestly for me, I have that custom software that I wrote that talks directly to the EOS. I would think twice before taking a show that didn't have an EOS that we could program on, because it just, we're so, as far as theater goes, we're so ingrained into that ecosystem that it would cost time if we didn't have it. And so, I've had shows where the theater doesn't have an EOS, so they might have an Expression or something like that, and I can use, I'll use that, but I can also rent them I can rent them an Ion if I want to. We can rent them a Nomad rig, et cetera, et cetera. Thoughts on Augmented? So I installed 3.0 on this board about a week ago, and that's as far as I've gotten so far. I'm really excited to see it. The big takeaway for me so far on it is it's not going to replace Capture, at least anytime soon. I think there are two different tools for two different jobs, right? So Augmented is a programming tool versus Capture and other previous software, which is more of a rendering tool and a tool to make more photorealistic renderings of stuff. So I'm very excited to start actually seeing it in work in the theater, and as soon as I can, I'm going to spend some time working on it. Next week, I'm only going to do one webinar because I want to spend some more time doing some actual learning stuff for myself. So that'll probably be what I spend some time doing. Go over my organization with EOS and palettes, EOS workflow class. Yeah, I've thought about doing an EOS workflow class, but there are so many people that have done that are way more qualified and way more talented at it than I am. And honestly, it doesn't get a whole lot better than the ETC videos themselves. So, maybe someday I'll do, when we get back in the theater, I can do some little tips and tricks videos and stuff like that. But I don't really want to do a whole sit down hour long, here's my workflow in EOS thing, because it's the same. I mean, you can get better produced content, I think, in other places. Gotcha. Tips on how to increase a budget. If from one thing to another. Yeah. So, I find that it all comes down to trust with the people you're working with, right? So, when a producer hires me, I'm hoping that they trust me to make those decisions. And, it just happened on a production that I was working on that has since been canceled. I was given a pretty decent sized equipment budget, and for the first time in my career, I got a shop list back. I got everything specified and ordered, and I still had $200 or $300, it was $2,600 left over in my budget. So I was like, okay, well, I got to do $500-600 of that for shipping, but then I still had this $2,000 left over. So I went to the production manager. I was like, hey, I would really love to, I'll be real upfront with you. I don't have a use for this extra $2,000 in equipment. Can I use it to bring in Dalton, my programmer? And they said, yeah, of course. And so we did. Of course, again, the show has been canceled, but I was able to do that. And all again, because that producer trusted me and we had that relationship. I've had other situations before where, it could very easily go the opposite way. And it's very much about knowing it's very much about knowing your audience, knowing the people you're talking to, where I wouldn't be able to go to certain producers and say, I have $2,000 left, because what they would say is, okay, well then thank you. We're going to keep that in our budget or in our coffers, which totally makes sense. I totally get that. So it's very much about knowing the situation you're in there. Live busking. Yeah, so Jake just posted a link to that YouTube video there talking about EOS live busking. There's some really cool stuff there. Sorry, everybody that works at ETC. I still just don't like busking on an EOS family console. I do it for those music previous videos I do, because that's what I have in here. If I'm doing any kind of like live stuff, I want it to be on an MA anymore. Now, a year and a half ago, I would have never said that. I'd be like, no, I'll do an EOS for anything, man. But not so much anymore for me. So how do you change the way you allocate your time when you're also teaching the people on your crew? Oh, story of my life. So this is a common challenge that I have, especially when it comes to programming. So that's the best way I can describe that, really. So to me, we talked in the very first webinar about how I always try to bring in a programmer when I can, somebody I know, somebody I've worked with, somebody I have that workflow, that rapport with, right? When I can't, I'm really hoping that the company is giving me a programmer who is actually a programmer and not just a board op or just somebody who knows kind of how to use the console, right? I see the programmer for the shows that I'm working on as just as equal much of a collaborator as I am, as with the rest of the design team, because what they're able to accomplish is basic. They're making the actual stuff happen for me, right? So when I work with Dalton, for example, we very much are co-designing that show together. I don't have to do I'm not even really speaking in channel numbers anymore. I'm doing, I'm saying, let's make this a little cooler. And then he and I work on the same wavelength. So he'll change something and I'll be like, let's change, maybe if we try this. And it's very much a collaborative thing there versus, somebody I might walk into a school or something school's different. I might walk into a small regional theater or something like that, and I don't have that relationship with the programmer, or they're not really a programmer. And so that gets really frustrated, because then I start saying, well, why am I not just doing this myself? Because now, in addition to having to design the show, I'm also having to speak in keystroke to this person pushing these buttons. So it's just one extra step. And, I don't have a great way to get around that. I mean, patience, obviously. I've gotten a little less patient, and this is a fault of mine. I've gotten a little less patient over time with it as I used to be, because I used to be like, yeah, absolutely, I'd love to help you learn, and I've had people come to me and say, I don't really know this very well, but I'm here to learn. I'm like, that's great. Anymore though, and I don't mean this to sound conceited, but like with as busy as I am, I don't have time to sit there and do that, right? Like, I've been hired to light this show. I've not been hired to teach your board op how to program the show. And so that extra hour that I'm spending doing that is now being taken away from another project, or really worst case scenario, it's being taken away from my ability to be creative on this particular project that I'm working on. So I try to have those conversations with producers right away. If I'm told that they have a programmer, the first thing I do is I have just a friendly conversation with that programmer, and I'm gauging like what their ability level is. I've had conversations with quote unquote programmers where I ask them, hey, I do a lot of palettes and presets and stuff. And I've had somebody say, what do you mean by palette? And then that, of course, then my mind just goes, okay, and then I go back to the producer and I'm like, we cannot do this, right? So does that answer that question a little bit, Casey? I hope it does a little bit. I think, of course, if I'm working in an educational environment and I've been hired to do that, that's a totally different thing, right? If I know that that's part of the process, right? If my team and I are training this person, then that's what we're there to do. It's not. But if I'm working in a professional setting, I want to be working with fellow professionals who are competent and able to do the jobs that they've been hired to do. And of course, all that being said, like I said, I am more than happy to help. Right. Everybody knows. I mean, it happened last week in the paperwork seminar, right? I was showing my workflow for something, and then somebody chimed in with the chat with something, with a little trick, and it just blew my mind, because I've been doing something a certain way for 10 years, and they just totally revolutionized the way I did that. So in no way am I trying to say that like I'm too good to do that. I would never say that. We're all learning it all the time. So what I'm trying to say is that there's a time and a place for, literally teaching somebody how to program a console from the ground up, which is a situation I've been in before. So. Okay, summarize the role of a programmer versus an operator. Yeah, absolutely. So for me, a programmer, if I go back to what I said about being a collaborator, a programmer is somebody who is helping to make that show happen and actually writing the cues and doing all that kind of stuff and helping me bring the vision to life. An operator is the person who's hitting the button, who is doing like housekeeping kind of stuff, things like that. So obviously very important position, but not every board op is also a programmer, even though a lot of them think that they are. It's just, they're two different jobs. And of course, sometimes it can be the same thing. Okay, a couple good questions here. Jake says he always programs himself because his theaters don't really have a programmer and he enjoys it. We have difficulties communicating to a program when you have one. Yeah, so that's a big, I mean, that was a definite turning point in my career, I think, is when I started working with real programmers. I used to program all my own shows, and I used to prefer doing that because, again, like, I didn't want to speak in keystroke to people. When I was doing a non-union show, I was programming it myself. But as the shows kept getting bigger, I started to not want to do that anymore because I found that anytime I was looking down at my hand or looking at a screen was time I was not looking at the stage. And I was missing things. I was not being as creative, and I wasn't doing my job as the designer in order to, because I was having to focus on the programming. And I find the exact same things happen when I'm dealing with somebody who's not necessarily an experienced programmer. I am spending more time figuring out how to tell them how to do something than I am focusing on the show. So an example of that I can give is like when Dalton and I work together, I'm able to say, hey, I think we need some effects in this moment. I want those effects to look like this, to change this color, to chase in this way. Let me know when you got it. And he'll go off and start working. I'll then go back to my script and start looking at the next 4 or 5 cues ahead. He'll tell me when he's ready. I'll look up, and then we can move on. And that helps us be more collaborative. But to speak a little bit more specifically to your question, Jake, I think it just comes down to practice, right? I think that you as a designer, especially if you have that experience programming, you know how you want things programmed. If you have somebody who is not quite as experienced as you are, you can teach them the way that you're doing it. And maybe you spend a show or two teaching them that thing. And then once they've gotten that, then you start to develop that relationship a little bit, right? So that happened with me and Dalton, right? Like we didn't start off just working perfectly together. The first couple shows we did together, we spoke in keystroke, and then as we got more and more comfortable with each other and more knowing what we wanted, now, he's making changes back there when I'm walking around taking pictures or something like that, and I trust him to do that. So, let me zoom back up here a little bit. So keep in mind, if anybody sends me a private message, it is visible on the screen right now because I'm sharing that. Depth, and talk a little bit more about show control. So I mean, for me, most of the show control I'm doing is either using timecode. So it's having a click track that's playing back and it's sending me a timecode signal in order to synchronize my lighting cues or my lighting hits or whatever it might be to that music. Or it's doing, having QLab hit go on both the sound and the lights at the same time, or vice versa. A lot of times, a lot of the projects I work in, I say there's a thunder crash or something like that. We'll send OSC commands out from our light board to the sound QLab machine that will fire the thunder exactly when we fire the lightning, right? I work with a sound designer a lot. We do some smaller educational shows together. Well, he'll actually automate his entire show based on the lighting cues. So as the lighting cues are firing, his mute groups, all that kind of stuff, all the DCAs, they're all changing for him based on the lighting stuff. So I wouldn't do that necessarily on a large commercial show, but for an educational show, when you're trying to teach a soundboard operator, for example, that's one more thing to take off their plate. There's all kinds of cool integrations and stuff you can do with that. So was it ETC? I think just did a cool show control video. Could have been somebody else. I feel like last week or week before somebody did a video all about timecode, but there's all kinds of content out there on that. Christian Jackson did one. Christian Jackson did one for MA and doing timecode work. So definitely check that out. The concepts are all the same no matter what software you're working with. Question, do I use my Stream Deck for other things? Yes, I'm actually using it right now. So I'm using a piece of software. It's never going to focus to that. I'm using a piece of software that I use for my live streams called Wirecast. And I was able to figure out today that I can actually present my Wirecast stream as a camera source within Mac. So that's what I'm using to stream this to Zoom right now. And so I have all of the shots. Like if I hit my intro shot here and I hit go, it takes that shot, right? And I've got my chat shot. So I've got that all in there. I had it for Vectorworks for a while, but I need to update that. I mostly use it for Stamp right now, though. And I use it in my everyday life. I switched to iMessage. It has emojis on it. You can do all kinds of cool stuff with it. I love the Stream Deck. If you use it with a companion app, totally awesome. If you do a lot of QLab work too, I have a QLab profile for it where you can do all those kind of things you have to remember all the keyboard shortcuts for. It's awesome. This is $100 or so, Best Buy. Totally worth it. How could a programmer make the jump to LD? I think that we talked about this a little bit last night at Zoom Beer, kind of just in the idea of just networking and stuff like that. I think that, if it depends on where you're programming. If you're a house programmer and you're doing you're doing the same shows over and over and over again, then chances are you're getting some opportunities to do some design work as well. And then it really all comes down to that networking. Talk to, if you're working with a lot of designers over and over, talk to them like, hey, can I come work on this show with you? Could I maybe come be your associate or your assistant on this particular show? And try to, it's all based on that networking. There's not really a, thing like, oh, I'm going to change my website to say I'm a designer now and then I'm going to get design jobs. It doesn't work that way. You have to just start talking to people and meeting those people along the way. So is there anything I always fight for during a show/shop order? People. I mean, my people are what I fight for. I'd rather spend money on people than I would on things. So, I will fight to have Abby or fight to have Dalton or fight to have Ben or fight to have whoever I can get on the show that's appropriate for whatever budget level I'll potentially have before I'll even fight to get equipment sometimes. Because again, 2 eyes are more valuable than 2 lights to me. Question, it'd be great to have a class on show control MIDI. Yeah, so ETC is doing a network tips thing. I think it's next week or maybe a couple weeks away. So definitely check that out. We could definitely talk about it at Zoombeer when I do topic suggestions next week. Suggest that. So one of my goals, just so everybody's aware, like when this whole thing ends, I want to start doing more of this, but like in my actual production work. So kind of like what Christian Jackson does with the concert world, I kind of want to start doing that a little bit with my theater work and doing topic videos and stuff like that. So things like some of the stuff that has been suggested, those are all things in the back of my mind, right? So next time I do a show that has a lot of show control, I'm going to do my best to document that along the way so I can turn that into, a 10, 15 minute video that then could be used as a training thing. So that's all in the back of my mind. We just have to, solve this global health crisis before we can do that. Is there ever an objection from the orchestra to using click tracks? Yes. Oh yeah, 100%. But typically that's a conversation that's had in the upper admin production design team with the music director and stuff like that. So like the drummer is not going to complain to me about a click track. The drummer is going to complain to the musical director and they're going to say, okay, well, you're going to like it or you're not going to be here. 5 years ago, I had to do a lot more convincing of people than I do now. But now, it's funny. A lot of the musical directors I worked with that were so hesitant to use the technology and to do it. They did it for the first time, and then they started to see the potential of what they could use it for, and now they want to do it on every show. For example, we did it for Mamma Mia in the park last year, and Mamma Mia is written to have backing vocals and synthesizer parts that are not in the orchestration. And so as soon as the music director started to realize, wait a second, I could add this instrument, I could do this, I could change this, then it was off to the races. So, mixed things there. So Jeremy, I'll disagree with that, Jeremy. I wouldn't say click tracks are standard. If anything, click tracks are not standard in most of the theatrical shows that I do. I mean, most theaters don't have the technology, don't have the budget to be able to do stuff like that. Because there's also, that's another job. Somebody has to program that. Somebody has to make those clicks. Somebody has to deal with all of that. It's also something to think about if you're wanting to incorporate a lot of show control into your show. If you're talking about doing a whole bunch of show control between QLab, EOS, all that kind of stuff, who's going to do that, right? That doesn't follow the lighting programmer. That doesn't follow the sound programmer. Sometimes that's a totally separate job. So I also try to fight for that sometimes. If I know that this is going to be a really show control heavy show, I say, hey, we need to bring somebody in at least for tech to be the person who's coordinating and lining up all these cues. Because again, if I'm doing it, I'm not doing my job watching the show anymore. Okay, so we went about 10 minutes further. Does anybody else have any other questions before we sign off for the evening? My next thing won't be until next Wednesday. Next Wednesday, we're going to do Zoombeer again. I will, between now and then, figure out how to make that a little bit more protected. Oh, a stamp seminar. That's a really good idea. Maybe I can get Sam in on that with me, and we can and he can talk about it, and I can show how I use it. I wrote a blog about Stamp. If you haven't checked that out, there's a cool video on that. And one of my projects for next week is to edit together a slightly better Stamp demo video as well. So next week we're gonna have Zoombeer on Wednesday, and then Thursday night I'm gonna be doing my production photography thing. So haven't done it yet. It'd be the first time, so I'm really starting from the ground up with it. We're going to talk about both how the tips and tricks that I use to shoot my shows, as well as I'll walk you through an editing process of how I edit my photos in Lightroom. I'm going to play around maybe having some demo files you can play with as well. So if you have Lightroom, you have a Creative Cloud subscription, you can jump in, but you absolutely don't need to have that to participate in the session. So great. So thank you all very much for your time today. and I hope to see you all again very, very soon.